We're at slide 30 on June 3rd. I think we'll get somewhat into, I'll skip ahead a little bit into next Monday's lecture, so we'll be a little bit ahead of schedule. Excuse me. What I may do is do a lecture Monday, then maybe either next Wednesday or the next Monday after that, interject a working session into that. I'll confirm that with it. Excuse me. I'll confirm that with an email. What I mean by working session is we'll hold class, but rather than a lecture, you can work on the labs during the class. I may wait till the following week until we have more content under our belt. This being kind of a crazy month, I mean, we're here 2 nights a week until late. That may minimize outside class time that you need. I mean, that'll kind of help with the homework, so you don't have to come in more nights if you don't have to, or you minimize that. So I will confirm that. So the actual dates on the PowerPoints may not always correspond with the actual date in which they're taught. But I will, once I decide exactly how I want to do that, I'll send out a message. So now we'll talk a little bit about numbers. We talked about strings before the break. A fundamental type of variable or object in JavaScript is a number. And it's a little bit less, or it's a little more simple, less complicated than numbers in C#. In JavaScript, the number type is used to represent many different types of numbers that you would have in C#, like double, floating, integer, and so on. In JavaScript, we just have one variable type, a number. And as I've written here, all numbers are floating 64-bit numbers in JavaScript. So if I set a variable, when we assign a variable that's a number, we don't use the double quotes. Remember, we're in a string variable, I'm in double quotes around the string. So here I'm assigning x to 2014.5 as a number, no quotes. So if I go back to the type of keyword like we learned earlier, it says number. We don't differentiate between integers and different types of numbers. Another number-related condition in JavaScript, which actually can come in useful, is a type of object called not a number. And not a number is shorthanded as NaN, where the two N's are capital. In one of the ironies of JavaScript, not a number is a number. So the keyword NaN is actually a number. So if you did type of NaN, type of not a number, it returns a number. Go figure. So where that's used, where NaN, and see, that's what I showed here. I said insert type of NaN. What is the type of not a number? Well, it's a number, of course. How is this useful? Sometimes something may happen that returns something that's not a number, and you want to know that it's not a number because you can't proceed. You may be expecting or hoping for a numeric value, and what you get is not a numeric value. So in the pseudocode that I wrote here, I am attempting to do math on this, 0.45 divided by Greg. Obviously, that's not possible. So I can see if a variable is NaN, and then if it is NaN, act accordingly. And to do that, there's a function in JavaScript, is NaN. Lowercase is, and then NaN with two capital N's. So is NaN takes one argument, and the argument is the alleged number. This also is easy to reverse in your head, especially this hour, your head might be spinning. Is NaN, remember it stands for not a number, it will return true if it's not a number. So if you're hoping for a number, you want is NaN to be false. So here the argument that is NaN takes is the alleged number. 76 times UB does not evaluate to any number. That's not a numeric expression. So is NaN return true? So I said isNaN is often a powerful function in JavaScript that allows you to test to make sure that what you're dealing with really is a number. If you want to do additional math on the value, you might want to do this first to make sure that you can do additional math. Yes?
I have a question about the number type.
Yeah.
I know if you want to transfer a string into an integer,
Yeah.
you need to use the parsing function, right? But
Yeah, you can still use those.
But the number type of the result should be float.
Or just number, yeah. So if we look at parse int, it's actually, that's a good question. It returns an integer number. It returns an integer. It's not as robust as C#, or the type it returns, unless there may be additional types in JavaScript. Those are getting too. The radix is confusing me, but let's not worry about that. In these cases, it's returning you can use parse int. That's actually, I don't think I covered that, so that's a good question. To return an integer, but the integer is still falls into the number type variable. It's not like C# where you have a integer defined variable, where is it int. So it's returning a number that's an integer. There's also there's a parse float where you can return specific types of numbers, but they're numbers. They're not an actual variable type.
So they're still in the form of
Number.
Float.
I believe so. You know, it may store it. Let's see. Yes. Just want to double check myself. Which is surprising, isn't it? JavaScript numbers are always 64-bit floating points. A little bit confusing and unnecessary. It seems silly that the number might be 2, and you're storing 64-bit floating variable to store the number 2. But it is what it is. That's a very good question to clarify that. But you're right that you can use these functions like parse float, parse int to give you a number that looks like it's in that format, but they're all the same. Oops. In JavaScript, we have an object called math. For once, it's different with a capital M for once. That lets us do, as you might guess from the name, perform mathematical functions on numbers. So math is not a variable you have to define. It's just a keyword that you can use. So capital M-A-T-H dot, so it has various methods here where we can pass in a number to the method and get the mathematical answer. So for example here, SQRT, now these are all lowercase. Math is capital M, but SQRT, lowercase, with a number, returns the square root of that number. So capital math dot square root 10 returns the the square root of 10. These are all, I hope I didn't spend the time. I don't think we need to go through, no I didn't. All of these, many of these will be familiar to you from math class. But you can, and this is a little like parse int or parse float where you can get specific elements of your number. You could get the absolute value, so if you had 14.7 and you wanted to get to 14, or no, absolute value is, let's strip out the negative, right? So negative, I'm getting bad, I need to go back to math. The absolute value of negative 15 would be 15, is that, I hope that's right. Good, thank you. It's also late. And tangential functions like cosine, sine, tangent, are available in math. But a key, did I write that, is that the number that you use is radians, not degrees. So that's an important point. So if you do math.sine, and the angle that you put in x is the radian, the angle in radians, not the angle in degrees. That I remember. SCIL, or CEIL rounds up the nearest integer, regardless of rounding, so 12 point. Sometimes you want to go to the next highest number, so math CIL 12.3 would be 13. Even if it's not 0.5, it'll go up to the next highest integer, keeping in mind it's still a floating point in the background. EX, E raised to the x power, so we have logarithmic mathematical calculations. If you have an array, this can come in handy. If you have an array or a list of numbers, the math.max or math.min will return the highest number or the lowest number in your list. Sometimes you may want to do this. We've actually, random will return a random number between 0 and 1. So every time random runs, it'll pick a random number. Then you could, if you want a random number between 0 and 50, you would just take this result, multiply it by 50. We've done that when we've suggested, sometimes they use GIS for sampling, pollution sampling, to suggest sampling points. And sometimes they want some degree of randomness to it, so we've actually used functions like that when we want to pick random spots, say in the Buffalo River, to search for pollution. This I have a couple other JavaScript fundamentals. This top one is similar to C#. You can nullify or clear out a variable with the null keyword. So here I'm setting the variable Greg to be nothing by saying var greg equals null, just like C#. So once I've done that, whatever was in the variable is now gone. The variable now refers to nothing. In some programming language, the word is nothing, but in C# and in JavaScript, the word is null, lowercase. You can also check, let's say you try to use a variable that's never been declared. It's a common problem. Maybe the structure didn't loop right, it was never set. So let's say I wanted to use J, but I never defined anywhere where J was. If you catch that, if you're lucky, you'll get errors a lot where you see that, where you try to use a variable but you never said what the variable was. Type of, in that case, would return a variable of type undefined. So when you see undefined variable, maybe in your console, you see undefined variable on line 20. What that means is you're referring to a variable that you never set. And I said that most often happens when you have some looping or branching, and your looping and branching isn't comprehensive, and there's a way that the code can loop through where a required variable never gets set. That's a common way why you would have this problem. So if later in your code you absolutely need the variable j, you need to make sure that all of the different potential branches before that somehow define j. You don't want it to sneak through without ever being defined, or you'll get an undefined variable here. JavaScript, I've hinted at this a couple times. JavaScript is dynamically typed, a dynamically typed programming language or a weakly typed programming language. It is not statically typed like C#. So here's a difference between JavaScript and C#. With a static type language, a compiler checks every variable before building. That's why, and this will, for those that know C#, when you define a variable, you have to define its type. You would say, this variable is an integer, this variable is going to be a string. Notice I didn't have to do that. As a result, strongly typed languages like C# have a lot of different types of classes. Like our objects on the desktop, unfortunately for the object developer, there's something like 12,000 different variable types. That'll make your head spin. Not here. So with static programming, all variables must be. This line refers to a statically typed language, not to JavaScript. JavaScript is dynamic. As I said, it's much more forgiving. It's designed at runtime. For example, I could say in one part of my code, set a variable to a string. And then I can turn around later and just say, now he's a number. Whatever. Okay, now A is a number. Okay, that's cool. In C# that would not be cool. A is defined explicitly as one thing, and as long as A exists in C# it will always be that one thing. JavaScript is weakly typed, meaning that you're a little bit more flexible. And during runtime, in JavaScript and C#, it's statically typed language. That's all done before the program even runs. Here, it compiles the variable types. Here, right in the middle of my code, I get to switch on. A Boolean, I've mentioned this a couple times, and here's another slide on it. A Boolean type variable indicates whether a condition is true or false. A Boolean variable can only be true. It only has one of two possible choices, true or false. So here, this expression, often expressions or comparisons evaluate to Boolean. That statement will either evaluate to true or false. And in this case, it evaluates to true. So when you have a condition or a variable where it can only be one of those two things, that's called a Boolean. I've also mentioned, here's a specific slide on this, I've mentioned arrays a few times. An array in JavaScript, as I mentioned, I think before break, it's a variable type that allows the storing of a list. So we can define, since we're so weakly typed, it's very easy to define. When you first define the array, you can put it in square brackets, this time not curly brackets. And then you separate the values with a comma. So I am declaring the variable myList to be an array with 4 items in it. I purposely had the 4th item because unlike some languages, they do not have to be the same type. You can have a whole grab bag of different things. So myList is now a list or an array of 4 items in it. And the 4 items are New York, Pennsylvania, Ohio, and 23.4. We can pull items out of the array with square brackets, and the array starts at 0. So number 0 is New York, Pennsylvania is 1, Ohio is 2, 23.4 is 3. And you see how I did that here. I give it the list name or the array name, and then in the square bracket I indicate the number that I'm interested in. So when I put 2, I'm telling it that I want the third item. And sure enough, it returned the third item, Ohio. Another easy thing, I should, like those books. Are they dummies books? I like those books. They have the little warning sign. I should put the warning sign on this page, if I were to do that, would be that it's very easy to forget this. Don't forget that the first item is 0, not 1. I've been known to do that. If you think about an array as a list, it's different from what we've learned so far. So these are a bunch of different things that you can do with an array. Length. I mean, on a string, length returns the number of characters in a string. The length on an array returns the number of items in the list. So the length on the array from the last slide would return the number 4. Concat with the parentheses combines 2 arrays into 1. So if you have array 1, say has 10 items in it, you have a second array, array 2, and with 5 items in it. You want one list with all 15 items in it. You would use concat, as pictured here. Array 1, concat, array 2. It's a little like using the plus with strings. So the result is just one big list with the items of both lists put together. We can use index of just like we could on a string. So index of lets you search the array for the item, like the index of Ohio, it would return 2. I think it was 2. And like with the string index of, the result will be -1 if it's not found. So if I did index of China, the answer would be -1 because it doesn't occur at all. Join lets you join the elements into one spread. Remember we did split before. This is the opposite. So if you had a list where the items were A, B, and C, you get a string. One string with the items of the original array all in one string separated by a comma. Just jumping down here, there's another one that's similar to string, like we did with a number. Does something very similar. I don't recall right now the difference. They're very similar. Index of also has a last index of. The big difference, index of starts at the beginning. Last index of starts looking at the end. So say you had a string with 2 Ohio's in it. If you did index of, it would find the first Ohio. Last index of would find the last Ohio. So you could certainly have a situation where the same string occurs repeatedly, and you may in some cases want to find the first occurrence. In other situations you may want to find the last occurrence, and you would use last index of. And once again, make sure the capitalization is important. Pop and push are different. Well, the thing about pop that's interesting is, these are just searching the array in most cases. It actually affects the array. So if I said my array pop, it will return me 23.4. So pop gives you the last item in the array. I don't know how they came up with that, but it removes it. You're actually taking 23.4 away from the array. So it would give you in the variable 23.4, and now the array would just have 3 items in it. Some of these things, to be honest, I haven't used that often, but I want to please do this. If you wanted to add a new item to the array after 23.4, you could have array.push and add, Mongolia, and then it would add Mongolia to the end. Reverse flip-flop, so now 23.4 would start. So array reverse would do 23.4 Ohio, Pennsylvania, New York. Shift removes the first element. So shift would clear out New York and just leave the remaining 3. Sort, this is nice, sort them alphabetically. Splice, I don't remember ever doing that. Splice lets you indicate items, how many, and where to insert them. So you wanted to insert new keywords inside the array. And then to add new things, push adds a new item to the end of the array, but unshift would add a new item to the beginning of the array. Okay. Like I said, a lot of these things I probably don't have to go over such detail, but at least you're familiar with some of the possibilities of the array now. You may or may not use regularly. Another type of object in JavaScript is a date object. The date object is used to handle date and time variables. We'll go over 4 main ways to create a date variable. An empty constructor, and the constructor is within the percentage parentheses. When you create a new, this also kind of implicitly introduces a new thing that we can do in JavaScript where we have more explicit objects. We're creating a new date with the new keyword, and date is capital, just like math was. If you just have blank parentheses, we will get in return today the exact time now. We won't get that far into it. So I'll alert new date with nothing in the parentheses. And we get, in full format, we get the current local time. And the local time is being retrieved from the settings on my computer. So if I run this again, it's going to return a updated time that's a few seconds later.
Can you go back to the window?
So, can I?
Out the window, I wanted to see the code.
Oh, right, sure. So the code to do that was simply new date with no additional parameters in date. So when you do that, that will return right now. Another way to do that that probably has limited use is if you put in a number, you can define the number of milliseconds since January 1st, 1970. If you're familiar with what that is. I'm not. But it is what it is. So if that's the number of milliseconds since 1970, we'll see what that is. Friday, March 10th, 5882. You can also specify a date string and then assign a date that way. And this format, I'll see if I can. So a couple of ways via W3 Schools. When you put in a string, there's specific formats that you can have the string. The preferred method is now it's a string, it's not a date yet. You're going to make it into a date. Would be the 4-digit year dash month dash date. I believe that's localized. We'll talk about localization to your computer setting. It depends on your country. In the United States, we will write today's to Americans. Today's date is but to many people in the world, I'm not sure. China. Flip it. So in Europe, for sure.
First,
Yeah. In European culture, the date is first. So this may vary based on that is part of your computer's localization setting. So because this computer is set, when it was installed in Windows, they chose English, not just English, but American English, things like that are set in the computer. Even English would be different in this case. So I can specify a string like that. And then it converts that string to a date object. I can just do a year. There's a variety of different formats that you can see here. It's very flexible. And if you really, this is the output that you saw. If you really knew what you're doing with this, which I don't, you can, the full format would be the day of the week, the month, date, year, probably localizable, the time in seconds, and then the comparison to Greenwich Mean Time, and then the name of the time zone. And I think the point here is that Tokyo time is not one. Western Europe is 1 hour ahead of Greenwich Mean Time. Tokyo is not. Obviously, Tokyo is well ahead of Greenwich Mean Time. And I think what they're showing here is JavaScript will, whenever possible, I said it's flexible, will ignore that. The person incorrectly put Tokyo time, where 1 hour ahead of Greenwich Mean Time is Western Europe. Another way that you can define just a date is with commas indicating the year, month, day, hour, minutes, and seconds, and if so desired after seconds, milliseconds. I didn't put that in. I believe you can stop at any point. You don't have to go carry it all the way through. You can stop at date, stop at hour, etc. There are many functions for returning and setting specific components of the date object setting. So these are, once you define your date object, you can get or set specific elements of the date object with these methods. Like, for example, get month or get UTC date, for example. So instead of doing this, I'll set a variable right now equal to date. So now that's, as the name implies, the variable. That's a good point. Set your variables to something that really does make sense. There's nothing wrong with that. If I want the value to indicate right now, why not call it right now? So now the alert will retrieve the date in UTC for right now. And it returns 4 because it's past midnight at Greenwich Mean Time in the United Kingdom. It's actually tomorrow, so it's June 4th already. I purposely did that. I remember UTC would be, I think, 5 hours ahead of Eastern time zone here. One other thing, just to keep this, because programming has to always be confusing, I can retrieve the current month, and it's going to return 5. You might have been expecting 6. It's because January is 0. All of these things are 0-based index, so January 0, 1 is February. That messes me up all the time, so I thought I would just point that out. I try to point out things that mess me up, which are a lot of things. So using these get functions, we could retrieve any number of these specific attributes of the current time. I showed you the Greenwich Mean Time date, the month, or so on, but we could get the number of milliseconds since 1970, all these different things, or set them. Like if we wanted to change we can't change time literally, but if you wanted the variable to now, instead of be right now, to be something else, we could set date to a different date. I won't go too far, or maybe we won't go as far into, it's already 9:20. Let me just see, and I think in the January, so we'll be starting ahead anyway. I duplicated some slides by accident. This is the June 8th, this is next Monday's lecture, and I'm noticing some familiar slides that we already covered. Anyway, I do that. So we have Boolean. We talked about Boolean already. I think these are all repeat. There's the slides about dates and typing. We'll do just a few of these and maybe just those two and stop. And then we'll pick up. JSON is pretty intense, so we'll maybe pick that up Monday when we're fresher rather than at the end of the long evening. But I'll cover briefly the JavaScript objects. Now, all the caveats about weak type, that doesn't mean JavaScript doesn't support objects. It absolutely does support objects, and you'll use a lot of objects in ArcGIS Server or JavaScript API. Not as many as you would with the desktop programmer, but you will. Unlike a static language like C#, where objects and interfaces, like I said, are all predefined, there's charts you look up, and this type of class or object in C# only has these specific methods. We can both use predetermined objects and our own defined objects with their custom attributes. So here, to declare a new object, you declare it with an empty bracket, like I've shown here. Now on the fly, you could never do anything like this in C#. I can just start adding properties however I want to my object, and that's all. So here I declared a variable, an object called my county with the curly brackets. I just decided to give it a property called name. Out of the blue, I called it Niagara. A property called C, the largest city, and so on. So now later, I can just retrieve the property I set with the dot notation, the mycounty.name. And again, this is possible because, in other words, there's no predetermined definition of this object anywhere else. I'm just doing this right now on the fly. Flying by the seat of my pants. Something that in a static language like C# would not be possible. Classes need to be predefined. So in a sense, I mean, maybe people could argue about this. It makes JavaScript easier. There's less pre-setup. But it may also puts the onus on you to be a little more careful. You can change things you don't want to. So I set up an object and just started declaring properties on it. Another way so here you can say so right off the bat, without any other planning, I can just, I don't have this in a class or anything. I'm just setting them. My P is not working. See, autocomplete even recognizes the properties that I set. So I can get properties that easily. Or another notation would be with square brackets, with a string representing the name of the property. So both these two syntaxes essentially do the same thing. Oops. Oh, spelling this county. I'm surprised I didn't get an error. Do I have that on console? I do. Oh. The problem is, instead of this country, it says this county. I'm a little surprised that I didn't get an error message in the console. Sometimes this is tricky. The error handling and checking is not always as helpful as you would like it to be. Now this will work. It didn't give an error, it just didn't work. And that's the most frustrating, because it's hard to track down what went wrong when you don't have an error message. You just have something you expected to work that didn't. There we go. That's better. You can also create a method by creating what we call an anonymous function. So those were properties we set on China there in the example. Let's say we want our object to have a method in action. We talked about methods being in action the first night or second night. So to do that, I can do this on the fly. Again, something you couldn't do in C#. So I have my object dot add license. I'm defining the method equal to an anonymous function. And by anonymous, I mean that the function doesn't have a name. It's just function, blank parentheses, and then in the brackets I write what the function does. So now the method add license, looks like I got a typo there, but the method add license will take the existing number of licenses and add it by one. So this is the procedure of adding a custom method to your on-the-fly object, your dynamically or weakly typed object. And it is 9:25. I do not want to start something like JSON at 9:25, because that will be a little more. So we will start that on Monday. We definitely will. I have to look at the labs and see how many are covered. I'm trying to remember which lab does what. That'll drive my decision on when to have a work day. But Monday for sure we'll have a lecture, and then decide after that when the work day.
For the lab for the capillary webpage, is there in particular the terminology that we need to know to?
It would be the HTML and JavaScript. I would say now you have enough to do lab 1. I will upload maybe even before I go home so I don't forget, I'll upload the lab assignments. I need to update the ArcGIS Online one. ArcGIS Online has changed slightly, so I might not upload that one yet since the last assignment. So I'll upload those very soon, and then you could get started. Well, I want to look at the other ones and see how far we need to go. So I may not do that work session for a while yet, depending on that. But yeah, we're ready to go. And the labs, since you haven't been in class, there'll be a PowerPoint like this that steps you through setting it up. You'll complete it, and then you'll show me, like before class or after class, you'll call me over and show me working, and then you'll get credit for it. So that's all.
Any questions, can we email you?
Absolutely. I should, yeah. I don't know if I mentioned that, but